Hey, so remember the guys that made this? Well, they're back, and this time things are a little bit different. Alright, so if you watched my video on cheap GameCube controllers, you may remember that I talked about a company called Voyee. Um, I haven't really had any contact with them since that video, but about 2 weeks ago they reached back out to me and said, hey, do you want to review an Xbox controller that's wired? We'll send it to you for free and we'll also pay you $10. After a long sequence of email threads consisting of 2 different people and 3 different threads, I now have 2 different Xbox controllers, and I'm supposed to give this one a 5-star review. This is the first time that a company has ever sent me something for free to review, but it's going to take something more than $10 and a free controller to give you a biased perspective on whether or not you should buy this. So here's my unfiltered opinion on this controller. Okay, so to be clear, I'm not going to give this a terrible review just because the company sent me this and expected me to give it a great review. I do think that it's genuinely pretty difficult to make a controller that is half the price of a regular controller that you'd buy for a system and have it work well, feel good, last a long time. And honestly, the best comparison that I can make is by using this controller. This is PowerA's wired kind of pro controller knockoff. PowerA really knows what they're doing in terms of making controllers, and in fact, I use their wireless GameCube controller pretty much every time I play Smash. But this thing kind of sucks. So the analog sticks are really huge and unwieldy. The triggers feel like they're going to fall off, and the D-pad kind of feels like you'd get it in a cereal box. So the bar's not super high. And just so you know, this controller goes for 25 to 30 bucks. So where does that leave us with our $30 Chinese controller? All right, let's take a step back here. This thing looks kind of weird. They've got this sort of tacky leather on the sides. The D-pad is objectively massive, which is kind of weird because it's definitely a company that's from China and Chinese people tend to have smaller hands. But anyways, the indicators for what controller you are feel pretty unnecessary because, I mean, I don't know a lot of people that play Xbox with more than 2 people. Anyways, real talk, how does this thing actually feel and what is it like to use? Honestly, I was pretty surprised by the feel of this controller. It's definitely got some quirks, but the leather actually feels pretty comfortable in your hands. It definitely feels better than the cheap plastic that surrounds the rest of the controller. The buttons actually feel pretty solid. The analog sticks feel really good too. It's really not as bad as you think it would be. It's a pretty decent feeling controller. Now, full disclosure, I actually don't even own an Xbox, but my girlfriend does. So I gave this controller to her for a full week, and she tested it out and gave me some thoughts. I also played some games with her as well, and I wanted to get my own opinion. So here's kind of what we came up with. She noted that the headphone jack on the bottom actually has really quiet audio, which seems like kind of a weird quirk, but she had to turn the volume all the way up to really clearly hear people. So that's kind of an annoyance. She felt like the dead zones on the sticks were kind of wider, meaning that, you know, if you wanted to just do a light move, you'd have to kind of push it further up than you normally would feel like you'd need to. But she did also say that the dual motors actually felt pretty powerful and they were kind of nicer than what she was used to. So that's kind of nice. Now, my own perspective, I felt like this whole housing for the triggers back here stuck out longer than felt comfortable for me. So that was a little bit weird. My middle finger kind of rubs up against it. So that felt a little bit odd for me. You're probably going to notice that more if you have larger hands, but it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just you end up just gripping it a little bit differently. At the end of the day, somebody who's going to be buying something like this that's half the cost of a regular Xbox controller, you probably either can't afford to get the OEM controller from Microsoft, or you just need a second controller for your friends. I don't think any of these annoyances are so big to the point where it's just a waste of money. Like, especially if this is going to be a secondary controller, I mean, you can get used to the slightly different feel, and you're not really going to care about the headphone jack issues. So I think it's actually a pretty solid option. The cable is plenty long. You shouldn't have any issues unless your TV is very far away, and even if you do, it's just a regular USB, so you can just throw an extension on it. So here's the thing. Voyee's GameCube controller sucks. Their customer service ranges from barely responding to you at all to bombarding your inbox with a bunch of emails that you really don't need. The whole 5-star review shtick of sending people out free stuff or paying them to do reviews is not a sustainable business model. And their naming scheme is so convoluted and the product listings are so similar that I initially ordered the wrong controller to review, and that's why I ended up with 2 of them. But at the end of the day, I do think that this is a pretty decent product. It's not going to survive daily use if you're gaming for like 6 or 8 hours a day. It's not going to be as strong as an OEM controller, but it is a pretty good option if you just need an extra controller laying around for when friends come over or maybe to travel with or something like that. I'm actually fairly impressed that they managed to give this controller such a good feel for such a low price. And what is nice is that Voyee does seem to be relatively good about replacing a controller that had issues. So it does fit the bill for being a good controller to have laying around and you don't care that much if something happens to it. I just think that Voyee needs some help in terms of understanding that you can't just pump out poor quality products and expect people to give them good reviews, and I think their customer service team needs to be more consistent with the experience that they give people. Now, with all that said, I'm never a dull moment. This is a 4-star controller, and I'll see you guys soon.